Hello everyone and welcome to today's Lemongrass live session. It's on cyber risks, tactics and targets, securing SAP in a changing threat landscape. I'm joined today by my colleague Dave. Dave, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi Ian, yes, I'm the CISO at Lemongrass, Chief Information Security Officer. Delighted to be here.
Fantastic. Let's get stuck in, Dave. So, cybersecurity seems to be everywhere these days. I only have to open the newspaper to see large companies suffering cyber attacks on quite a regular basis these days. Jaguar Land Rover is a recent topic. Are things getting worse?
Well, there certainly were a lot of high-profile attacks in 2025. And the one you mentioned, Jaguar Land Rover, that was so large that it actually impacted the UK's GDP forecast.
Goodness me, that's quite an impact.
Yeah, and that kind of thing does have the effect of focusing minds at the national level. So cybercrime is clearly not just a company-level concern, if it ever was. Now, I'm still waiting to see the full analysis of 2025 compared to previous years, but we certainly have seen some interesting patterns in the behaviours of threat actors.
Threat actors? Give us a bit of a description of that, please.
Yeah, that's the formal name for what most people would probably call hackers. Our Lemongrass Security Operations Centre uses a discipline called threat intelligence to tell us who these groups are and what they do. Now, it's important for us to understand their motivation and tactics in order to know who's going to target us and our customers and how they do it so that we can effectively defend ourselves against them.
Okay, so using my new vocabulary, threat actors. What kinds of threat actors are there, Dave?
Oh God, that's a huge topic. We'll probably talk about it all day. I can probably group the main ones into three broad categories, which I would call teenagers, criminals, and states.
Teenagers, criminals, states. Okay, so let's kick off with the youngest, teenagers. What are they after and how are they doing it?
So the teenagers love mischief. They're primarily motivated by the pure thrill of breaking in and the respect they get from their peers when they do. They don't generally have access to the sophisticated hacking tools of the bigger groups, but don't underestimate them. Some of them have been extraordinarily effective. They're particularly good at social engineering. So they'll phone up a help desk and pretend to be an employee who's lost their password. And seriously, this really works. We believe that's how initial access into Jaguar Land Rover was accomplished. Now, this group does favour disruption because the bigger the news story, the more kudos they'll get from their friends.
Okay, so it's not just all in the movies then. But what about the criminal elements?
So the criminals are a bit different. To them, hacking is a business, and like any business, they're all about return on investment. That means they'll tend to go after low-hanging fruit for easy money.
Obvious thing is not to make yourself an easy target then.
Exactly. Now, there's an old joke about two guys who disturb an angry bear, and one guy starts to run away, and the other says, "Do you really think you can outrun a bear?" And he says, "No, but I can outrun you." Your defenses don't have to be perfect, but if you're above average, then if you can run faster than your peers, then you're less likely to be a victim.
Okay, that makes sense. So the criminals are after disruption as well then, but they're using that disruption in order to put you under pressure to pay their fees or their ransoms or whatever you may call it.
Well, that used to be the case, but that's not necessarily true now. So what you described is the classic ransomware model. Stop a business from operating, make them desperate. But if you disrupt a major business with knock-on effects on all their suppliers and their customers, you're potentially impacting a national economy, as we saw with Jaguar Land Rover, and that will attract a national response. This is especially true if you disrupt a business that's classified as critical national infrastructure, so things like hospitals, power stations, ports. The national government is going to put their best resources on the case, and you really don't want to get on the wrong side of the American NSA or FBI or British GCHQ, because they're very good at what they do and they will find you. So even if you're in a non-extradition country like Russia, it's really not much fun to be put on a sanctions list and unable to travel anywhere or to use global banking systems.
Okay, I can only imagine that, but how do they avoid that then?
Well, I used to think that things like cryptocurrencies, things like Bitcoin, would protect them due to its anonymity. But I'm not really sure they thought that through, because cryptocurrency is, by definition, an immutable shared ledger, which is great news if you're in the forensics department of the FBI, because every transaction is publicly available for all time. Forensics teams are also getting much better at following the money in crypto, even when criminals do try to cover their tracks with things like mixer services. Now, that's why some of the smarter criminal groups have taken a different approach, and that is simply to be less disruptive.
Sounds counterintuitive. How so?
So back in the olden days, the criminals, they invented ransomware. You break in, you encrypt everything, you demand a payment to decrypt it, and that would hopefully return your systems to an operating state. Then they realized that if they had access to all this sensitive company data, personal information, health records, and so on, they could also steal it and demand a second ransom to keep it private. So ransomware plus threatening to leak your sensitive data is called double extortion. Now, the ransomware bit is very disruptive. It halts operations. It stops your company from making money, or it stops a hospital from treating patients. But if you just break in and steal all the sensitive data and then email the CEO with a ransom note, who outside the CEO's immediate circle would even know that you've done that? As a victim company, it must be very tempting to just quietly pay off the attacker and pretend nothing had happened. You might even be able to use your cyber insurance for some of this. You've got a very big incentive to keep it quiet. And even if you did report it to the likes of the FBI, it would likely be a much lower priority for them than some disruptive group that had stopped operations in, say, a hospital.
So if they're just taking the data, don't cause any disruption, don't leave a footprint, much easier to get away with.
Well, that's a theory. And remember that if they've stolen all of your data, that probably does include a copy of your cyber insurance policy, so they'll know exactly how much money to ask for.
Sounds like I might be in the wrong business. That sounds like proper, easy money. Let's go and start a crime group tomorrow.
Well, no, I'm a Boy Scout. In fact, many of us cybersecurity folk have come from the military or government, and we're pretty mission driven. We're the good guys, honest.
Good to know. Good to know you're on our side. So the final category you mentioned was the states. A bit more detail on that?
Well, in fact, that's exactly the kind of mission-driven hacking that some people in our industry might have done themselves in the past.
Like yourself, Dave?
No comment.
So what do these state groups do then?
So people hacking for their state do whatever they've been tasked to do in order to further the interests of their country. They're the most sophisticated of all. The top tier states are very well resourced and have some very clever and often highly classified hacking tools at their disposal. If it's a high enough priority, they can do pretty much anything.
Okay, but thinking about it in terms of business competitiveness, why would a country decide to hack a company?
Well, that very much depends on which country and which company. Some states will want to steal your intellectual property to give their own companies an advantage. China used to do that to great effect. Whereas if your company does something like operating a railway, then it might be useful for a rival state to implant a bit of malware that could stop your trains running if they wanted to. And we've seen a lot of that sort of disruption in Eastern Europe recently. If you're a bank or an airline, then your customer records would have high intelligence value for any country that wants to see where a particular person has traveled and what they spent their money on. There are lots of reasons why a state might want to target you, but you might also just be collateral damage.
Collateral damage in this context?
Yeah, so the classic example here is the Russian NotPetya attack of 2017. That was targeted at a bit of tax accounting software widely used by Ukrainian businesses. So it was clearly intended to harm the Ukrainian economy, but it rapidly spread outside of Ukraine and caused disruption to lots of big companies across the world, like the shipping company Maersk. Similarly, more recently, when we see an activity there, those Russian hackers disrupted a civilian satellite communication provider that was widely used in Ukraine, but that attack also knocked lots of German wind turbines offline because they just happened to use the same provider. So none of those was the intended target, they were just collateral damage.
Just caught up in the machine. So, summarize, there are lots of different types of threat actors, each with their own different motivations, different goals, I guess, different access to levels and quality of resources to pursue them. So it's important to know who's targeting you so you can defend yourself, not just the fact that you're being targeted.
That's right, and the boundaries between them can be quite blurry. So some teenagers will link up with criminals who can monetize their hacking by dropping ransomware on the target they've broken into. Some states act like criminals, and all of them try to confuse their pursuers by pretending to be something they're not, which is what we call a false flag operation. It's pretty messy and confusing, which is exactly why our customers rely on our SOC's threat intelligence team to help them figure it all out.
Good stuff. But back in the real world, and this is an SAP podcast, I'm sure our listeners will want to know what lessons they can take from all this cybersecurity knowledge, types of things they can apply to the world of SAP.
That's right. Well, remember that SAP is the operating system of the business, and that makes it a highly attractive target to both disruptive and non-disruptive actors, because it's both essential to operations and it contains lots of valuable data. So SAP is, of course, highly specialist, and it's on a continuing journey of security maturity.
Security maturity? Is that a polite way of saying we've not got very good security at the moment?
No, I wouldn't say that. I'd just say it's very different. So the IT industry has got very practiced at securing commodity technology like firewalls, Linux servers, cloud environments. But because SAP is highly specialist, the experts who look after it have a propensity to view it in isolation. You can spend your whole career as an expert in one very deep and very specific aspect of SAP. In my experience, to a typical SAP expert, security mostly means configuring access permissions in the SAP environment itself. Now, that is very important, but it's not sufficient. Remember that SAP sits on top of all of this other technology too, and you have to treat it holistically. Now, folk like me who've been in security for a while, we've seen this all before.
Mature gentlemen, you mean?
Yes, mature gentlemen like us. We've seen all this before, and there are plenty of lessons that we can draw from other technologies and how they dealt with security that we can apply to the world of SAP.
Got a case or an example in mind?
Yeah, I'd say that OT is a pretty good example here.
OT?
Yeah, OT is operational technology. So we're all familiar with IT, the information technology that deals with the virtual world, with data. Operational technology deals with the physical world, with machinery. It's the specialist computers that control industrial plants, water treatment works, and so on.
So another word, another phrase to add to my vocabulary, but it's meaning the opening and closing of valves and things. Again, things you see in the movies when the hackers are in.
Yeah, precisely. And importantly for our analogy, it's also highly specialist and traditionally does things in normal practice that would horrify a typical IT security expert.
Oh, like what?
Well, a typical OT network is probably 20 years old, and they're installed alongside the big bits of machinery they operate. And because they're built to last, they're rarely updated. But that also means they were built for a different era with different security assumptions. They probably don't have any encryption, so everything's flying around the network in the clear. They may not have any authentication. So if you can get onto that network and tell it to open a valve, it'll just go and do it. And the whole system is probably controlled by a computer running Windows XP.
Goodness me, that sounds absolutely terrifying. Why have they done it like that?
Well, firstly, remember that it was probably built a very long time ago, before OT security became a big topic, which it increasingly is today. And also their priorities are different. Now, recall security's so-called CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. In the IT world, we worry very much about people stealing our secrets, things like our customer data and our financial records. So we make sure that they're encrypted and we strictly control access. Confidentiality is the big driver here. In OT, we don't really care about confidentiality. Does it matter if everyone can see that my valve is 52% open? But in OT, we very much care about availability, making sure that I can open and close that valve when I want to. I mean, it might even be safety critical. So just like the rest of the plant machinery it sits alongside, the OT network is built to last and engineered to be reliable. And that means it's as simple as possible with little to go wrong.
But not very secure, right? So why don't we hear about chemical plants blowing up all over the place?
Well, mostly because it was hard to get access into these OT networks. They were air-gapped, which means that they're not connected to the internet.
So it's impossible to hack them then if you can't dial in.
Oh, if only that was true. But you couldn't typically do it from your bedroom because you needed to be able to jump that air gap. So as the owner of an OT network, your main security controls were really your chain link fence and the physical lock on the door of your control room.
So if you own an OT network, it's only the state hackers that you need to worry about things. They're the people with the resources to be able to bridge that air gap and get in. Are you safe from criminals and teenagers?
Well, the go-to example of how you could jump an air gap is Stuxnet. And that was the worm that broke those nuclear refinement centrifuges back in 2010. Now, that nuclear facility was buried deep underground with lots of physical security controls, but someone still managed to sneak in and conduct their cyber attack. I think it was on an engineer's laptop or something. And if you do go back to those three groups that I discussed, getting that worm into that facility and knowing that it would work as expected on that specific version of firmware, on that specific model of centrifuge, that is a huge and complex intelligence operation. That's well beyond the domain of the teenagers and virtually all the criminals. So yes, It is really the domain of well-resourced states. And
so that's just putting in the way then a blocker to help move the criminal along to the next organisation, rather than. But if they really want to come into your organisation, they'll find a way.
Well, it used to be the case that it really was just the states who would get into OT. But remember how things have changed over the last few years. Increasingly, companies have sought efficiency and productivity gains by linking their OT systems up to their IT systems. And you can see why. If the oil level is running low in your tank, you can automatically order more oil through your ERP system. And of course, during COVID, when everyone was stuck at home, the idea of being able to remotely administer your plant machinery was very attractive.
So this kind of specialist computer system was never really designed to be protected from hackers because it was not connected to anything, but it's now connected up to the internet. So that air gap is effectively bridged.
That's right. And now criminals and even teenagers can now get into and mess with it, even if they don't know exactly what they're doing when they do.
Okay, coming back to my earlier question, it's all really interesting and scary, but since this is an SAP podcast, what's that got to do with SAP?
Well, let's think about what SAP is. It's a highly specialist and complex computer system, much of which can trace its roots back to the pre-internet days of the 1970s. It was built to be super reliable, and over time, companies connected up to more and more of their IT systems to realize efficiency and productivity gains. And they even connected to the internet, which is how we book our flights these days.
Just like OT.
Exactly, apart from the booking flights bit. So a lot of the security lessons from OT naturally carry across to SAP. Now, I'm not saying that SAP security is bad, but like OT, it's a highly specialized niche, and the kind of people who work in that space and become deep experts in it don't necessarily have the same exposure to modern security practices as those working on the front line of modern IT, where we're defending our systems from every threat actor on the internet every day as part of our daily business. And as I said, most people in SAP, security is all about configuring access permissions. Now, that's very important, but it's not sufficient.
So there are things that the SAP world can learn from similarly specialist domains like OT, but also back to the main cause from IT.
Yeah, in fact, I'd say it works both ways. Just like we can't expect a deep SAP expert to be fully up to speed on modern IT security practices, we can't expect a normal IT security expert to have a deep understanding of SAP. You need both. This is always going to be a collaborative effort, and it's increasingly important as SAP itself moves to cloud.
Well, with RISE and BTP.
Yeah.
But doesn't SAP take responsibility for all the underlying stuff there? As a business, you're just consuming as a service, and I guess configuring those access permissions.
Well, that's the model, yes. But if you look at something like the RISE reference architecture from all the big hyperscalers, you've got your RISE environment hosted in cloud in one corner of the diagram, and in front of it, between RISE and the internet, you've got a traditional VPC, a normal cloud environment that you've got full control over. This is a good thing. It means that you can build layered defense. You can put all these additional security controls in front of the RISE environment that an attacker has to get through before they get anywhere near your business crown jewels.
So in a way, we can architect away some of these security problems.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer that a large part of good security is just good architecture. And that's exactly what we mean when we talk about secure by design. Indeed, Lemongrass has signed CISA's Secure by Design pledge because we strongly believe in those principles. Security is something you plan for and build in from the start, not something you add on after the fact. It's built in, not bolted on. And don't forget that although RISE is the future, lots of big companies are still on-prem, or like many of our customers, in traditional cloud, where we still have to secure all the underlying virtual machines and cloud infrastructure too. And that will remain the case for a while.
So what do we have to do to ensure an SAP environment is properly secured in cloud?
How long have you got?
Well, on this podcast, about another 5-6 minutes, but maybe just give me some highlights and some takeaways.
Sure. So let's think about what an attacker does and how we can stop them at each stage with a basic layered defense model. First, they have to find a way into your environment, some vulnerability they can exploit. And I mean vulnerability in the broad sense of the word. So not just things with CVSS scores, but also misconfigurations of your cloud environment, ways that your help desk can be socially engineered by those teenagers we talked about. So you need to work out all the different ways an attacker might get in and how you can secure your perimeter. We call that attack surface management, and that will include things like vulnerability management and CSPM.
Again, Dave, CSPM?
That's cloud security posture management. That's making sure your cloud environment is properly configured to be secure. So doing app and OS layer vulnerability management and CSPM, that'll keep out most of the teenagers and criminals.
Okay, that sounds like page 1. What's on the next page?
So step 2 is security operations. We always assume breach, which means that we assume that the threat actor has somehow got through our first line of defense and is in our network.
Okay, so next move.
That's the job of our security operations team, our SOC. They constantly monitor our environment for anything suspicious that suggests threat actor activity, and they evict anyone who shouldn't be there. They also deal with the forensic investigation and some of the cleanup if they do find and evict a threat actor.
Ooh, how would they typically do that?
With lots of tooling, endpoint agents, seams and saws, that's probably too much detail for now, but just remember that they can only defend what they can see. So you do need to have appropriate tooling at different layers of the stack, and you need to be able to do this efficiently and effectively at scale. So in Lemongrass, we partner with CrowdStrike to defend the cloud and OS layers because they do it very well at huge scale. But up at the application layer, security operations in SAP itself is much more specialist, and CrowdStrike doesn't cover that. So we use different approaches and partners there, which all comes together in our Lemongrass SOC, so we're protecting the full stack. And that's the holistic approach that I described earlier.
Okay, so that keeps you safe from threat actors who actually broken through your perimeter.
Well, pretty much, unless they're a particularly sophisticated threat actor like a state.
And to defend yourself against them, you do what?
Well, I'd never say that you could be 100% safe from the most sophisticated threats, but you can reduce that risk with approaches like threat hunting.
Okay, and that's step 3.
Yes. So threat hunters use threat intelligence to tell them what kind of threat actors are targeting your specific environment, perhaps because you're in a particular industry or region, or have the kinds of things that would be of value to a state-backed attacker, as we discussed earlier. So the way a state-level threat targets, say, an American airline would be different to those attacking a French power station, because they'd be after different things to achieve different goals. So our threat hunters build a hypothesis about what evidence they might see in an environment if that kind of threat actor had been active there, and then they go looking for that evidence. Our threat hunting team does this regularly for several customers today.
Ooh, you found anything interesting?
Couldn't possibly comment.
Of course, you're not going to say. So it sounds like we've got 3 layers of defense, 3 corresponding approaches to keep all those threat actors out.
Yeah, I mean that's a simplified view, obviously, but yes, if you, number 1, secure your perimeter, ensure there are no vulnerabilities that can be exploited. Number 2, monitor and actively defend your environment with security operations. And 3, if you believe you're subject to the most sophisticated threats, then threat hunting is a very nice thing to have as well.
Well, it sounds very simple, though.
Well, it may sound easy, but we've invested in some pretty sophisticated technology and training, and we're working with some top-tier partners to do it well.
It certainly sounds like it. So, due to time, I think we'll wrap up there. So, Dave, thank you very much indeed for your time.
My pleasure as always.
And if anybody wants to take this dialogue a little further, there'll be a QR code coming up on your screen in a moment. Scan that, and we can fix it so that you can either talk directly with Dave, one of his team, or we can put you in touch with someone in Lemongrass who'll be able to help you out. Thank you very much for taking your time to listen, and thanks again, Dave.